You're listening to the Canned Fruit Podcast with your favorite trio, Danielle, Jess, and Kia. We will have meaningful conversations on what it looks like to have compassion and respect when communicating with others. This show is a safe and brave space to open up. So let's start. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Canned Fruit, where we are having candid and fruitful conversations. I am here with the illustrious Jessica and Kia. Hello, ladies. Hey. We're still excited to be here with you all and to share and discuss more things about how to have these candid and fruitful conversations. So, ladies.
This is kind of an appropriate one for what we've just been through. The title of this podcast is The Highs and Lows of Conversation. And man, that's kind of what we're dealing with today, isn't it?
I am only laughing because I literally dragged them through an emotional trench and then said, let's record. So it's my fault. Whatever happens, if they just start booing me, it's just what happens. But yes, Jessica, we are talking about the highs and lows of conversation, and they are definitely high, and there are definitely some lows. I think we stay in pretty the middle ground, but it doesn't make it any easier. I'm just curious, do you all have memories of really high conversations and really low conversations? Is that a general feeling you have when you have conversation? Do you feel drained or do you feel energized?
Wow. I think it's easier for me to remember bad conversations than it is positive conversations. But I know I've had that feeling of I feel so relieved that I had that conversation with that person, or I could tell that person really needed to talk today. I'm so glad that I showed up and was present for them. But in general, let's see, how do I feel about conversation? I think lately it's been kind of challenging. Conversation has been really challenging. I think I've lost some of my social skills through the pandemic. Yeah. I mean, we just haven't, practice makes perfect, right? And we have not been practicing a lot. Even my spouse and I, right? Just kind of get into the watching TV every night kind of phase. Yeah. So I don't know. I kind of feel ready to make some changes in conversation. Yeah.
Ready to go.
I'm ready.
And I don't know how conversations make me feel in general. Actually, no, I do.
We know how they make you feel.
They definitely make me feel a little bit drained in general. And I was trying to think of a good conversation, or a conversation where I left it feeling some form of a high or something. And what you said, Jessica, totally hit the nail on the head. If I leave a conversation knowing that I was there for someone else, that makes me feel very good. But I'm trying to think of a conversation where I showed up and it was just a lively conversation because I was there, and I don't, wow. Yeah, no, I can't think of one that's like that.
Wow.
Yeah, but it makes me happy to be there for other people when they're, it's to lift someone else up, definitely makes me happy. So I was oh yeah, no, I can think of a few conversations where that's happened, and I've left feeling that's so great. I was there for them.
I could tell they really needed that.
Yeah.
Generally I come up feeling really good in conversations. Even when they're hard ones, I feel the way you said it, Jessica, about you feel relieved. I feel if I've had a really good conversation, it feels almost like when you have a fever and you start to sweat, and it's kind of they say the fever breaks, and you just kind of have all of that. And I just feel so excited because I'm just we've had a breakthrough. We've had a breakthrough. So I'm not, that should say that I'm not really, as much as I am good with the small talk, that's because I like hearing myself talk, and I'm a little bit for the giggles.
Know thyself.
Yeah. Hey. We can only be who we are, okay?
Right?
It's like when Kia says she doesn't know how she feels in a conversation. Really, Kia? Really?
But I immediately changed my mind, though.
You did. Know thyself. But yeah, I think when, funny enough, though, talking about the pandemic, I feel because we've been inside for so long that it's been the first time in my life as an adult where I felt tired from conversations.
Yeah.
And as we're like talking about really serious things all the time, it's like, oh, I do kind of need, maybe there was more balance in my conversations in a way that I didn't notice.
That's a good way to say it.
Yeah. And so now it's like, okay, so every time I talk to somebody, it's about like, have you got the vaccine? And I'm like, can we talk about reality TV a little bit? I just like, Real Houses of Atlanta. Like, do they have the vaccine? Because I need them to get the vaccine to get back on TV and get my.
Show us some yelling at each other, ladies. Come on.
We can't always be kumbaya. Go ahead, Kia.
I was just like, I think you're making such a good point right now that now I need to kind of reevaluate my life. Well, not really my life a little bit, but my home at least a little bit, because my husband is the outspoken, jovial one who I always jokingly say has never met a stranger. But a year on, everybody's a stranger. At one time, he was having a conversation with a neighbor who was walking by, and it was the fakest laugh and the fakest voice. I don't think I had ever heard it. Like, it was foreign to me. And I was just like, we need to get you back in public or something, because if I'm the one that's supposed to be carrying conversations, we don't need to go anywhere.
The extroverts are not all right.
Really? I was like, oh, maybe it's because all the time we're just talking about serious stuff and trying to figure out what day the kid can go to school and, all these things. And, our only break is WandaVision and Falcon and...
us too. That's our break.
So now I have to rethink about that.
Well, so it leans into, and I'm mixing things around a little bit here, ladies, but just thinking about the types of conversations, because what we're pulling out here is that, okay, sometimes we need a little WandaVision in our lives. Sometimes we need to talk about the strategy of schools and moving and vaccines and all that stuff. And there's, there are different types of conversations. So some of the ones that we've highlighted are like difficult ones, positive ones, personal ones, professional ones. And I'm just curious, as we think about the high and lows of conversations, like what reaction do you all have to these types of conversations? Like, do you find them individually easier or more difficult in any particular way? And I want to also throw out that they might not be the only four, but these are just kind of like the ones that we pulled up.
So I'll say that professional conversations are the easiest for me. And I recently had a conversation with one of my mentors, and they pointed out, we were talking, I was like, at work, I have this personality. I'm always laughing and smiling and just always positive. And in my head, I'm Eeyore. And she said, well, it's your professional persona. I was like, what do you mean my professional persona? I'm trying to get my outside to match my inside. Like, no, when you're at work, that is, you've created this professional persona, and professional Kia is smiles, is jovial, and all these things. Now, when Kia leaves work and real Kia comes out, you could be Eeyore again, but you've created this persona and that's how you present. And it's like, it's just so interesting because that's exactly how I present. I've just created this persona, this professional person who is not me. I don't know a different way to say that, but just this other Kia. And so when I'm at work, I'm totally fine. I don't know if necessarily saying pushing boundaries, but asking for what I need, being direct. And so I can be jovial Kia. I'll be direct Kia. I'll be all these things because professionally, I know that all these things are necessary, and it's a bit different than my personal, where I tend to be more, I don't necessarily want to say meek, but maybe because I'm more self-sufficient in my personal life. I don't have to rely on other people to get things done like I do in my professional life, that I don't ask for what I need because I expect that I'll be able to deliver it on my own. That was a lot.
No, but it all made so much sense. I was thinking of the phrase that people use, customer service voice.
Oh, yeah.
You had like that. It really is. It is a whole persona to be like, hi, how are you guys today?
Yeah, so, like, I don't know that person.
It's so great to hear from you. But you said that it's actually easiest for you. And I find it sometimes very draining to do that fake it till you make it thing all day long. That's really interesting that you said it's easier
like
for you.
It's just,
it is like acting.
It's just
yeah.
I
think it might be easier because for me, professional things, that customer service voice persona tends to deal with things that in my like list of priorities are lower.
So like the conversations are like automatically less difficult.
Yes. Or less, less important to me, right? I don't care about the outcome as much. My personal life, I'm deeply I'm ingrained in that, right? I need an outcome. It's more about my wants, my needs, my desires. And then at work, I'm like, it's a little removed, right? Because it's more about the company's needs and wants and desires.
And
then, oh my goodness,
right here, I'm sitting here like, let me in.
Go.
Go.
Well, no, I just want to highlight that we've created a new type of conversation. So we had difficult, positive, personal, professional. Now we've got important, because it doesn't need to be, that's just like separate. It's important. You all are just giving me so much insight into what I've seen over the course of my years as a professional, air quotes. And I present like Kia, but I'm drained like Jessica. And so I find it what's been my most important place is because I find conversations so important, right, in general, that when I'm having them, I need them to be authentic. And so I find the professional setting, the professional conversations challenging because for many reasons, as a woman, as a Black woman, as an immigrant child, like there are all these layers that I have felt like I needed to augment my presentation to ensure that I was respected in spaces. And so when I hear Kia talking about kind of like you present so jovial, well, yeah, I'm generally jovial, but I'm also one that will drop a letter at the end of a, I might split an infinitive, I might do things that are just not textbook appropriate. I'm loud. We were just talking about this on our pre-therapy show about being bold and like saying things. You say big things, and this is why it's so important, because I think my professional experience historically has been less forgiving, and so it's one thing when you feel like you are respected in an environment where they respect you as a human and you can have a difficult conversation and you can progress through to understand. It's another thing when you're in a professional setting and it feels as though you were cut off the minute you make a mistake and feeling like you need to perform, to your point, Kia, because it's one thing if you're making a choice to perform. It's another thing if you feel like you have to in order to exist in that space.
Maybe my priorities are a little flipped, and I'm going to say it anyways. I was deciding whether or not I wanted to qualify the fact that I care about my family, but my family doesn't care about them. But I draw a lot of my self-worth from my professional competence. And I'm working on that. But I think that's one of the things where I don't feel like I chose to create that professional persona because that is the area that I saw the most importance in creating that additional, additional something that I have to think.
This is really fascinating because I know the two of you might have, I'm listening to you describe your professional persona, and it makes me suddenly very aware that there are different types of work, which is kind of obvious. But my professional persona was, didn't have opportunities to ask for things. It was a service role. And so that's also why I found it so draining, because to show up and care for each person behind every door, as you did for the person before them when you first clocked in, like every person gets the full of me because they need that, because they're feeling vulnerable. That in itself is draining, right? Like every conversation behind every door is draining in that way, and that you have to show up fully. Yeah. And also then not having other outlets where you can kind of try to get ahead in that role. Mm-hmm. It creates a very specific type of persona, I guess, right?
It also changes the way you have a conversation. Because you're probably not in a position to say anything you want to say, right? Like, it's like you have to be very cautious about the conversation you're having, filtered. It's just interesting to see how we've actually latched onto professional, which I think is really interesting, that of the four, and then like even thinking about personal and professional, the fact that we've latched to professional and started digging into like how our persona affects the conversations we have. Do you think that we don't have that in our personal? I'll just start off and say that I have that less in like my deepest relationships. I'm more honest than not. I find that difficult conversations, and again, I'm slapping my wrist, because it's like, it's not just difficult conversations, it's important conversations, it's difficult conversations, it's even positive conversations, but I'm more proactive to encourage those to happen in my personal life. And to your point, Kia, my self-worth is very attached to my professional prowess. So maybe it's because I feel valued just for showing up in these spaces that I'm like, hey, Kia, I don't like what you said last Tuesday. Let's talk about it, as compared if you were Kia, my employer, and I'm like, I really want to show up in a positive light. I want to frame this in a certain way, and my personal work is merging those two as best possible, because I don't always need to show up and be like, say whatever I want to my dearest friends. Yes. But there's also the balance of like showing up honestly and respectfully all the time. And, but I feel like I do that way more in my personal conversations. They are important, but they're important in a different way, because my self-worth is not attached to those conversations.
Interesting that I'm trying to think about how I show up in my personal conversations, and I don't really have a persona. And I think that is because I have if I'm having a personal conversation with you, I've already validated you. I don't know, checked you out. I've determined that you are worthy of my time.
Yes, here we go. Put it on.
Quite honestly, you made yourself worthy.
You made the cut.
You made the cut. So I'm basically, I don't have an escape for my professional relationships other than to leave the job. Which would mean leaving the job where I draw a lot of my self-worth. But in personal relationships, I can drop a personal relationship if I want to. So I guess I'm most authentic in my personal relationships, because if I determine that I no longer want to have a relationship with that person, then I don't have a relationship with that person. If I want to continue a relationship with somebody, then I continue the relationship with somebody. So I feel like I don't have the need for the persona personally, because I can leave it at any time, where professionally, especially while I work for a large organization, you move around and you'll be like, oh, I worked with that person the last time. Like I can't escape the people. So I always have to have that buffer. In creating my professional persona, I've created a barrier between my real self and my workspace.
So I just want to celebrate all these things that we're talking about, because that whole persona thing is going to have to come up again, because it's deep, and it is something that you all are like highlighting for me. And I was like, oh, I thought I was better at this. Obviously not. That self-worth is still teetering on the inappropriate line, which is affecting my conversations. Right. So this is how it all ties back, is like, if you are in your most authentic self, which we were talking about, which we're going to get into, like truths with a capital T, authenticity is one of those things. And if your persona is affecting your authenticity, you're probably not having the best types of conversation. So we'll get into that. We'll get into that. But I do want to like make sure that, you know, so we've got difficult conversations, we've got positive conversations, important conversations. I think we've highlighted that positives seem to be easier. You know, it's very rarely that you find a positive conversation that's like, we need to talk through the steps of having a positive conversation. And so, you know, and so I think what we're highlighting from this personal professional dynamic is really that what we'll be spending a lot of time in the course of this podcast is talking about difficult conversations and things that are challenging and important conversations, you know, because I think that dynamic is going to end up being the one where people feel the most hesitation to do these things that we're about to talk about. But before I get into that, we've got our quote. I love our little quotes of the episode. So difficult conversations are almost never about getting the facts right. They are about conflicting perceptions, interpretations, and values. This is from Douglas Stone, Difficult Conversations, How to Discuss What Matters Most. Reactions.
Yes.
I think it's funny that he's saying it's not about getting the facts right. And I'm like, that sounds factual. Like that quote sounds like a fact to me. Like that sounds exactly right.
Okay, so I'll throw it out there though, that difficult conversations are almost never about getting the facts right. They're about conflicting perceptions, interpretations, and values. And I can get down with that. But after what we saw of what was, again, we just talked about, again, you're getting all the veils back, listeners, like just about how do we show up our most authentic self? Well, the fact is in my opinion, for the past 4 years, there's been a lot of misinformation, right? Mm-hmm. And so I find this is what resonates with me. Not resonates. This is what I'm reacting to into this quote is that it's never about getting the facts right. Well, yeah, it is about perception, but sometimes things are factual and we need to make sure that we have resources that channel back to what's true and what's not true.
So what you have said is a different interpretation of the quote than how I took it. So, I love me a good fact. But so when I read it, I wasn't thinking necessarily about the actual, how should I say this? When he says that difficult conversations are about conflicting perceptions, interpretations, and values, when we talk about the misinformation and more important than misinformation, the disinformation that has gone on for the past several years and actually is continuing to go on, I think that speaks to values, that speaks to whether or not you actually hold honesty as a value, rather than is this fact right? Do I consider it value to actually put information out there that is correct? Yeah. So when you can talk about alternative facts, which are not a thing, there's the truth, and then there is or fact, and then there is not fact or lies. Then what you have done up front is tell me that you do not actually value the truth, and then I can go on from there. So the difficult part of the conversation, if you're having a conversation with someone who believes in things like alternative facts, isn't about whether or not the facts are right, but do you have the same, I guess, baseline values? Are you both going to come to this conversation honestly? And if you aren't, then to me, what's the point?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I took it more that way. I think I took it to be very simple. It's a very simple quote to me, in that when you think about the difficult conversations that you've had in the past, how many of them are about something that you can look up? So I'm going to say very small amount for me personally. More of them are about people's perception of that fact, people's experience with that fact, and how it has showed up in their lives. Like that can't be true because it hasn't happened to me personally. Right. Mm-hmm. That can't be factual because that hasn't happened to me. I've never seen it with my own eyes.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, let me throw. Well, let me say this. I needed those. I hear those, and I'm really grateful for Kia, Jessica, and Douglas Stone. I think that there is a cynical part of you that's still like, people lie, though.
Yeah,
all the time.
But I'm actually like, I think you're right. The more important thing is that they lie. I hold on to that value of honesty.
Yeah.
Right? As the thing that brings me back into the fold with this one, because if they're lying, then they don't really value honesty, because we can talk about interpretations, but sometimes it's just not true, Yeah. And that, again, that might be the lawyer in me who's like, well, people lie. They like to lie for real.
Yeah.
No, this is good. This is good. And thank you for keeping me less cynical. I appreciate that.
I think it's true too that people lie. Yes. And also sometimes people don't have the facts. They're ignorant, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so whether they, heard it through a story, some random fact in air quotes, or they've never heard the actual fact, they're probably not arguing actually about the fact.
Right. Right.
It gets into that maybe less interpretation, more perception, especially when they've seen that air quote fact. And I just saw it. It was on a meme on somebody's Facebook, and,
So is Facebook.
Yeah, I saw it. It came up on my wall. It was in so-and-so's Facebook stories. Of course it's fact.
Yeah.
I think the most egregious, what upsets me the most is when there's disinformation, when you should consider that person a trusted source, whether that's your president or your congressman or your senator, your governors. I mean, I know that we have, kind of maybe a little bit laughingly this perception that all politicians are lying and that type of thing. But these are people who you should actually be able to trust.
Right.
And the fact that we can't and that we don't is a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, thank you, Douglas Stone, right? Because now we've got some deeper insight into the fact that it's not really ever more than often than not, it's not about the facts. It's about these perceptions, interpretations, and values. But having been in these conversations that are involving a differing in perception, a differing in values, what are the things that make those conversations most challenging? Because it's not always, if it's not the facts, we're saying it's not the facts. It's not, Danielle, are you as fly as Beyonce? Yes or no?
Clearly.
As fly as Danielle.
Yeah, it is. Thank you.
Proper comparison.
Oh gosh, controversial topics. Let's talk about it. But it's about, there's something else making it challenging. And so I think it's definitely could be the topic. But, what other things? Is it just subject? What else could it be?
For me, what makes conversations the most challenging is my relationship with whoever is in that conversation, especially if it's an unbalanced relationship. Let's just say I'm in a taxi going to the airport, because let's just speak that into the future.
Manifest.
Yeah, I'm having a conversation, let's say with my husband, and, the taxi driver wants to get involved because they're human and they're hearing. It's not like I'm whispering sweet nothings into his ear. But then they want to be involved in the conversation. And I'm like, oh, well, I kind of just wanted to talk to my husband about this. And now it's this unbalanced, this person I very much trust and the stranger who I do not want to actually be involved in this type of conversation with, or something like that. But yeah, it's mostly my relationship status with whoever is in the conversation, because that will, quite honestly, that will determine how much of my I guess self I bring to the conversation with people I trust. Of bringing my whole self. That means you'll get argumentative Kia, who will pull out my mother-in-law used to call me iPhone because I'd be like, that doesn't even sound true. So I pull it right out and like, she's like, well, hold on, Kia will let us know. She'll pull out her iPhone and let us know. But yeah, it's how much do I trust you to bring my whole self to the conversation.
Ooh, man, that's a good one. I think for me, it's a combination of people and subject, or maybe more accurately, values. Especially when I see that my values aren't held by that person that I'm very close with. Like that is like the most difficult conversation that I can imagine, is when I'm trying to be validated by this person that I love and who loves me, but we're not agreeing on this thing that I think is so essential, right? Like, but that's how it is, right? That's the facts. Like, no, that's not true. It's your value, right? That doesn't mean it's a feeling that you have.
Ooh, Jessica. I really
isn't that
like
hard?
that.
It's hard to swallow though, right? That like a value isn't fact. It's fact for me, obviously. My value is my fact, but that's not true necessarily, even for my closest partner, right? My husband. That's
So here we go again. Back. I thought we just said honesty is a value. Mm-hmm. Okay, sorry, I'm really hooked up on this. I don't like liars. I don't like liars, so that's why this is like coming strong. But I'm just wondering, like, maybe I'll just pull back. I don't know, and so I just have this. I have my feeling now. which we've now said is not important. But I'm just curious as what if that value is honesty? Like, how is that? I'm going to come up like I have some serious trust issues. That's not the case. I'm just really hung up on how we're talking about values in terms of like, is values a feeling?
I don't know if it's necessarily a feeling.
Or maybe I misinterpreted what you were saying, Jessica. So like maybe that's not what you were saying.
When we think about things like honesty, like being part of our values, we have to remember that we can't expect that of the other people in it. Like we might think like, oh, honesty is like a baseline thing. Like everybody believes in honesty.
Right.
As we have seen, not so much, not necessarily. And also it may be that they value something more than they value that. They might value prestige or money or their own. Maybe if something seems to be not attacking their family, but going at the security of their family or home life or career or whatever it is, then they'll value that more than they will being honest about whatever that thing is.
Yeah.
I want to throw out another thing that makes challenging conversations for me.
Okay.
My mom would always say, don't embarrass me in public.
Oh my gosh. I just had like a visceral reaction to you saying that.
And she would say, if you embarrass me, I'll embarrass you. And we always took that very seriously. Mm-hmm. And I think, again, to your point about how I think about values, what you're saying, Kia, I think about the various lived experiences people have. And I function well under most challenging conversations, but put me in a public setting, I will react negatively. If we're having a challenging conversation and you put it and you want to have a public display, I will react very poorly under those circumstances. And I don't know if other people would be okay with that. I can't really envision a situation where that's a good thing, but I think some people can stay calmer, more calm under the circumstance, and it just riles me up. It it is the moment where you will get me yelling. It will be the moment where you do get me like feeling extremely defensive. I'm not in my best space when there is an audience, when there's like a public situation. And so I just think about like needing, we'll talk later on about our, in other episodes about our environments and truth with a capital T. But I do think that's one that really, even as I say it, gives me chills because I'm like, don't embarrass me in public. I hear my mom like, do not embarrass me in public.
Yeah. Even when Kia was describing the like talking to her husband when the taxi driver could hear, I was like, oh, that makes me uncomfortable. Like, even that makes like, I don't want another person to hear my business. I don't want another person to hear. I'm like, I don't know, secretive, private to a fault, whatever that might be. Right. That like, no. With this just needs to be had. Like, can we go home and talk about it? I don't want to talk about it here at dinner where other people are trying to have a nice dinner.
But you know, what's so funny is even in that example, I was trying to think of something because here we go. I'm definitely not, just because I didn't grow up this way, but I'm definitely not a person who thinks of like the other people around as not being there. Like sometimes people forget that the janitor is there or that the taxi driver is there or things like that. So I was even trying to think, I was like, what conversation would I have in a taxi that I wouldn't want them to be a part of? But I couldn't think of a better example. But I am a bit like you, and that's a my mother thing where it's basically like, don't tell our business to anybody. And I was telling her this to everybody all of the time as a child. And I guess she had to retrain me to be like, we can't just tell everybody everything that's going on at the house all of the time.
It's definitely interesting to think about, like, we've come into this conversation saying, okay, we're going to talk about conversations, but then we're like, okay, but those conversations can be personal, they can be professional, they can be important, they can be difficult, they can be positive, which again, positive is still ranking low on the priority list.
Very low.
They're fun to have. But...
They're fun to have. We need more of them, but in the cases we need less practice with them. But then it's like, now we're seeing that different scenarios create different opportunities for us to have those conversations. So is it the topic is really challenging? Is it that we have differing values? Is it that it's a public versus a private situation? And then thinking about like the relationship, and so the one last thing, just before we wrap up, is that we just need to think about in terms of I think, Kia, you might have wrote this down, personal insecurities and kind of like knowing where you are.
I did, because I was thinking about conversations where I don't feel like I have the correct expertise. Like I said, I love me a good fact, but if I'm trying to think of why would I be in a room with a bunch of like people with doctorates in physics. But if we're talking about physics and I'm in a room full of people with doctors in physics, I'm not even going to ask a question because they have a different baseline knowledge than I do. I'm really just going to be there listening and observing, but absorbing, because I would not feel like I wouldn't be able to have a conversation, because I just would feel like, okay, well, everybody in this room is way smarter than me. So I'm just going to be quiet.
Can I throw something else out there, Kia?
No, absolutely not. But thanks for asking.
Boundaries.
If you all could see my face right now. The point I was trying to make, I will put my foot in the ground now, is that I wonder, though, if it's that we find the bravery in those spaces when we sit and we listen, right? Because if you think you need to have those comment all the time, which I fall victim to, you feel those like insecurities, like, oh, I need to make a comment and I can't make a comment because I don't know anything about this physics, right? But isn't there a power in the listening? So I guess I'm trying to reframe this thought a bit, because there's power in knowing that I'm not an expert. There's strength in knowing that this is not my area of expertise, but I'm so confident in my ability to explore and learn and grow that I can sit back and listen.
I changed my mind. You can totally add that point. I like it.
Too late, delete. Phew. Here we are. another day, another episode, ladies.
Mm-hmm.
This
another
is
day, another dollar.
Another day. I like it. I do think that we have loads more to cover. There's so much stuff that we didn't even get to in this episode, but it's great to just have this space and time to explore that there are the highs and lows of conversation, that there are good things that come out of it, which we clearly don't touch on a lot, but there are also these challenging areas where we're trying to figure out how do we take a challenging situation and have something positive come out of it. And so maybe as we like poo-poo on positive conversations, we're saying, how do we make these other ones shift into having positive outcomes?
Yeah, that's it.
And so we'll figure that out with you all as we continue to explore over the course of the season. But until next time, keep having candid and fruitful conversations. Kia, where's my can pop?
Bye, guys.
That brings us to the end of this Canned Fruit podcast episode. Thank you, listeners, for joining us today. We also want to thank our assistant producer, Brianna Jovan from What's Good Productions. If you enjoyed our show, we invite you to connect with us on Instagram at cannedfruitpod and email us at cannedfruitpod@gmail.com. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to your favorite shows. And be sure to come back next time for another discussion as we continue to have candid and fruitful conversations. Until then, this is Jessica, Kia, and Danielle. And don't forget to open up.